Let's get sweaty.
Hey guys, welcome to another Shenmue Dojo video. This video today is going to look at a slightly different slant on the Shenmue series. It's a little bit more negative, although I don't like being negative, but the question I'm asking here is, why didn't Shenmue appeal to the masses? So this is looking at the mechanics of Shenmue, the reception, all of those things, the console, all of those things together as to why it didn't get the mass appeal I think people hoped it would do, and I know we wanted it to. Let's have a look at that. As I say, it's a slightly different take of a video. Hopefully it's not too negative. I don't like being too negative about Shenmue, of course I don't, but I thought this would be an interesting discussion, hence the video. So let's have a look through some of the areas I've sort of identified. So the ones I'm going to go through is its mundanity, the pacing and action, the console it was on, being the first to even do these things, and also the meme culture around Shenmue as it is today. So let's start with mundanity. We all love Shenmue for its slice of life feel and being able to be in the life of Ryo Hazuki. We love walking around, we love talking to all the NPCs, we love exploring the shops and just losing ourselves in the world. What I think Shenmue has been accused of in some circles is that because of this, and especially Shenmue 1, is it can be a little bit boring, a little bit repetitive, and doesn't respect the player's time. Now, Shenmue doesn't advertise this off the bat, and it's very much inspired by sort of old point-and-click games as a sort of going back into the early 90s, that you can definitely feel that with Shenmue. There's some point-and-click adventure stuff in here, and essentially its heart is a detective game where you go around, talk to people, etc. So, having to do that on repeat, slowly, as the game develops, I think some people may have found that quite challenging. Adding to the fact that Shenmue 1 doesn't have a wait function, and there's certain things that are triggered at certain times of day, which you can easily miss in Shenmue 1, and people easily get frustrated by this. Now, Shenmue 2 put a wait function in, so where you had to wait at a certain point for a certain time, or had to be in a place at a certain time, you could hit wait, fast forward, and away you go. So they corrected that, but the problem you have is you lose people with that mundanity to a point. We loved it, but other people would have gone, well, why would I play a second Shenmue game when it's just more of the first? Now, it is, to a point, Shenmue 2 and Shenmue 3, but what Shenmue 2 especially does really, really well is it improves on the systems of Shenmue 1, gives you the wait function, makes it easier for the pathways forward to be found, so it's a bit easier for the player, you can find help a bit easier, and I just think it smooths those edges out, those rough edges out that some people would have left Shenmue behind for. So it gets, like, I guess, unfairly categorised as a whole series being boring, whereas not being funny. The first game sort of leans into that slice of life type of thing more, whereas Shenmue 2 is very much bigger in presentation, bigger in story, bigger in action, and it sort of leaves some of those aspects not behind, but polishes them. And Shenmue 3 also has the wait function as well, and there is different pacing in terms of action, where you can go and find fights, etc. So that brings me on to the pacing and action. Shenmue 1 is very much methodical. It goes its own pace, it's slow, and there's significant gaps between the action points, between the investigative elements of the game. We quite like that. Modern gamers, I think, maybe struggle with that a little bit. Gamers now seem to want games that offer a fast pace, more action, which most RPGs offer in abundance. And I would argue to a point there may have been an element of that back in the day when Shenmue was first released, because again, we didn't really know what we were getting. So while it sets it apart for us as a community and as a fan base who adore this series, it doesn't always conform or entice the masses in. The action in Shenmue is done fantastically. The choreography for all three games in terms of the fight scenes are really well put together. Yes, okay, you could maybe argue about the fighting engine for 3, but I'm going to park that for now. But the cutscenes where there's fighting are done so well. But some will argue it's not enough. Now, Shenmue 2 corrects this in the offset, in the fact you're in a fight within the first 20 minutes, you lose your bag, you're in your first QTE sequence, and it really sort of sets the scene for what's to come. Now, that could also be partly because they would have expected you to have played Shenmue 1 potentially, so you're not going to be sort of put out by the QTEs or the fighting that pops up. So the question that arises from this is, Could Shenmue 4 strike a balance between these? Now, I'm hoping it can. But for me, Shenmue 4, in terms of its pacing and to entice people in, needs to kick off with something massively action-packed from the start. So it could be on the Cliff Temple, for example. We know in Shenmue 3 people were left, Ryo, Ren, and Shenmue were left walking up towards the Cliff Temple. Why not have them raid that? That'd be the first action point in the game. Lots of fighting, lots of action, lots of story, setting the scene, and that could entice some people through. On top of that, you could have lots of optional fighting that people engage with if they wish. Unlike the Yakuza model, which I love the Yakuza games, don't get me wrong, but a random fight every 5 minutes, after a while gets annoying and it loses a bit of its impact and sort of doesn't grab you the way that I think it would do if it were a bit spaced out better. Shenmue 3 did start down this path, and even Shenmue 2 did, so they could use that as a basis to build it up more. So for example, you could have optional tournaments to enter, you could have hidden fighting arenas, not just like the Rose Garden, for example, but ones that are a little bit harder to get into, that may require you to engage in some of these earlier tournaments to push your way through to the harder ones. I don't know, but it's something that I think could really balance that out a little bit, for want of a better expression. I know Yu Suzuki himself has talked about the pacing of Shenmue 4 and potentially having sort of a more story-focused approach with sort of more modernised improvements around what modern gamers essentially would like. Moving on and away from the action, the pacings, the console itself. Shenmue sold really well on Dreamcast. The first Shenmue did 1.2 million copies, fourth highest selling Dreamcast game of all time. But knowing what we know now, it was always doomed to failure on the Dreamcast. Take away the development budget just for a minute, because we know that was astronomical. Shenmue was sold on a console base of around 10 million final. So at the time that Shenmue came out, you'd be looking at anything between sort of 8 and 9 maybe million, depending on where you are. That is a big ask for Shenmue to appeal to a big audience within that. And now get in mind, it's appealed to essentially over 10% of the user base in terms of a sale. That's not bad. There's been fall off, obviously, with Shenmue 2, and Shenmue 2 sort of suffered a bit of a hit here. Now, Shenmue, as we know, was groundbreaking, massively groundbreaking. But because it didn't have the mass audience that the PlayStation 2 did, and around those flagship titles, it lagged behind in terms of sales and exposure to the mass market, despite being groundbreaking at the time. There is a point or discussion around whether Shenmue 2 or Shenmue in general could have gone over to PlayStation 2 and what that may have brought for the series. That's a different discussion for itself. There's technical issues, there's all sorts of other challenges there, and it's probably a video in itself. So I'll park it there. Shenmue 2 then suffered almost a double whammy, if you like. You'd have had the drop-off from people who didn't really get into the first Shenmue game, and that is always expected with a new IP, whatever, it happens. Others also would have moved away from the Dreamcast altogether, and so the sales took a hit from it. So there's that element to it. Then there's the move to Xbox, which curtailed a bunch of sales on Dreamcast in the United States. And then the odds of good sales on Shenmue 2 across the board diminish a little bit, because then people are like, well, I'm not going to bother to move on to other consoles, may not have got an Xbox, whatever reason, and then wouldn't have picked up Shenmue 2. So it's challenging for Shenmue 2 to keep that momentum going, given the console that it was on, the move to Xbox, and the chances that the install base might well have been smaller than the Dreamcast at that point. Now, that said, it did still sell around 300,000 copies, not 300 copies, 300,000 copies worldwide on Xbox, which isn't bad. It outsold Jet Set Radio Future, for example, which was also bundled in with some consoles. So it did pretty well for itself, but clearly it wasn't enough. Now, you also couple in sales of Shenmue 2 on Dreamcast. It's alleged, and I use the word alleged, around 300,000 copies were sold between Japan and the EU. Some of those EU copies ended up in America, because obviously you couldn't get it on Dreamcast over there, so it was imported. But those figures have never been confirmed. But approximately you have about 600,000 copies, in theory, and I use that term in theory, were sold between Xbox and Dreamcast for Shenmue 2, which is about 50% retention. Now, I don't know if that's good or bad in terms of games, follow-up games, and how that may or may not line up. I don't know. But it doesn't sound bad on paper, but somebody who's more knowledgeable of the industry can probably tell me whether that's a good or a bad thing, because I really don't know. Moving away from console is the fact that Shenmue was the first. I know there's arguments out there in terms of other open world games and RPGs like Zelda, Final Fantasy, etc. Even Metal Gear Solid, some people try and argue. But Shenmue was massively groundbreaking in terms of open world RPG games for the time and what we have now. The level of detail in Shenmue is in my mind, even now, unrivaled compared to a lot of the RPGs that we get that are open world today. A lot of them are empty, full of bloatware, and just very boring and repetitive. And there is an argument, and probably a clamour among some, that to have smaller but more detailed worlds than the massive open worlds that we do today could be the way to go. So taking that inspiration from Shenmue could be a way forward. But the problem by being first and essentially ahead of the curve, which it was, is you do things well, but also you do things that are then improved upon that mean you end up getting left behind a little bit. So Shenmue laid the foundations for modern gaming, open world gaming, but over time, other games will have looked at Shenmue and gone, they did this, this, and this really well. So, for example, the cutscenes are fantastic, the music is awesome, but they may have looked at the voiceover for potentially and the control scheme, especially for Shenmue 1 and 2, and gone, that's really clunky, we need to modernise that and make it more receptive to the player. So that's just a couple of examples of things that they did differently. Also then factor in that Shenmue, as I said earlier in this video, is the way it's paced isn't necessarily conforming to modern standards. Other people go, well, Shenmue's quite a slow game, this game's really fast, we want to cater to fast action-packed gratification early on, and there you end up sort of in this place where Shenmue gets left behind a little bit, which is sad, but is inevitable as time goes on. That's not to say Shenmue can't do something like that, and I made the point earlier in the video about Shenmue 4 hitting the ground running with a real good action sequence, fighting sequence to open the game, set the story and get people into it. But what I don't want Shenmue to do is lose its soul. And modern gamers these days, as much as it pains me to say it, they like instant gratification. They're all about that sort of instant gratification. Can I get something early? Can I finish this quickly? What do I get out of this? They're not necessarily willing to put in the graft, the hours, the time to really get immersed in something like a Shenmue game. So the job of the Shenmue community, franchise, people around it, is to get people involved in this and go, well, this is why you should get involved with this, is why it's different. But also Shenmue needs to move with the times a little bit to entice people in to then encourage that side of things, if that makes sense. So there's a big ask here, and by being the first, you set the path for others to improve, build upon, and go down their own roads. Now, I've mentioned modern gamers, so with Shenmue, I have to mention the memes. Shenmue, especially the first Shenmue game, I'll come to this point in a minute, is treated in some circles as a bit of a meme game. So be it the forklifting, which is on every gaming website meme list at some point, sailors and hunting for them, the interesting voiceover, which I know is accused in some circles of being quite wooden and quite bad in parts. I don't like saying that, but there are some elements of it that are a little bit cringy, I guess. And mainline gaming circles will make fun of it. That's what happens. It happens to a lot of games these days, but Shenmue does tend to think I get worse of it. And then when you think of the other media coverage around the Kickstarter, some of the utter, I want to use the term, falsifying of information by certain outlets, and it creates a problem. You then also have high-profile reviews going after Shenmue a little bit, going to town on it, and people assume that this is the case for the whole Shenmue series. So Shenmue 1 is the focus of the majority of these memes. You get a couple of Shenmue 2, not that many for Shenmue 3, being honest with you. So what people do is they generalise. They go, Shenmue 1, forklift simulator for arseholes, boring, blah, blah, blah. They then don't give 2 a chance. They don't go, well, what's 2 like? Because they're not going to engage with 1. So it's a challenge here that actually with Shenmue 2, which is the better designed game, faster paced game, more story action involved, more fighting, all those sorts of things that Shenmue 1 is accused of, Shenmue 2 mostly corrects, people don't get there. So on top of the memes, on top of that, you end up in this generalization where gamers look at Shenmue as a whole and go, it's slow paced, it's boring, it's a forklift simulator, the voiceover is terrible, and it's a complete meme game, and why should I bother? Without respecting what it actually did for gaming, let alone wanting to engage in the second game of the franchise, or even the third. So it makes things really, really challenging. Many articles don't even mention Shenmue 2, or 3 in fairness. So that just goes to show, whether it's selective or not, I don't know, but it goes to show that then people essentially look at it and go Shenmue and just go across the board and stereotype it, which isn't right, but I can understand where that sort of feeling comes from, I guess. And I, at pains to say this, say to people who are interested in the Shenmue series, play 2 first, most of them, because I say it's the faster pace, it's the action-packed game, and it's a really good story. And then going to 1 and just see what the fuss is about. I've found on a personal level that the friends I've had who have played it have played 2, then gone and played 1 and go, right, I get what you're talking about. The other way round, I think, in my experience, people have struggled with it, and then couple it with the memes and everything else going on. It has this reputation and people just don't really want to pick it up. And that's a complete shame. But there are things the community can do about it. Obviously, there's plenty of community groups out there. Obviously ourselves, Shenmue Forever, Phantom River Stone, No Context Shenmue, Wandering Through Shenmue. I've probably got others that I've missed as well, like the 500k, Shenmue Master. There's loads of them out there. And our job, and your job as community, is to get out there and help entice people into Shenmue. What makes Shenmue great? What makes that game, the series, the best series that we've ever played? What draws you into it? Why does it draw you into it? And why do we want to see this thing finished, essentially? Which is why we have the hashtag Let's Get Shenmue 4 on the 4th of every month. So guys, to sort of round this video off, why do you think Shenmue didn't appeal to the masses? What do you think about this? Is it the pacing? Is it the console? Is it the story? Or is there something that I've missed, guys? Drop us a comment below. I may do a follow-up video to this just to sort of have another discussion around it. Don't forget, guys, give us a like, share, subscribe on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the usual places. Thank you, as always, for dropping in on the content from the dojo, and I'll be back with a video in the not too distant future. But for now, guys, take care and have a good one.